Whether art imitates life or the other way around, one thing for sure is those who control the stories control the culture. And for far too long when it comes to film and television, women have been systemically aged out and virtually erased from the stories that are told. This is a podcast of stories and conversations about real women to expand the limited narratives we're told and to explore how the ways women are portrayed or not portrayed in film and television as they age influences the way women are seen in our society. Welcome to There's More to Our Story. I'm Elisa Gallagher, your host. Hi, it's Elisa here with There's More to Our Story, and I'm so excited for this episode. This is my very first guest interview, and I'm absolutely thrilled that my guest today is my incredibly talented and dear friend, Mariann Aalda. Let me tell you a little bit about Mariann Aalda. In 1981, Mariann became one of the first African-American daytime soap opera heroines, the feisty young criminal defense attorney Didi Bannister on ABC's Edge of Night. But these days, she's prosecuting ageism with a TEDx Talk, a solo show, and as an AARP Age Disruptor. Some other highlights from her 30-year TV career include co-starring opposite Red Foxx and Della Reese as their daughter Elizabeth on the CBS sitcom The Royal Family, recurring as Lita Ford, Anthony's yuppie-from-hell girlfriend on CBS's Designing Women, and co-starring opposite O.J. Simpson as his wife Ellen for 3 seasons on the HBO dramedy First and 10. But all that came to a screeching halt when Mariann committed the most unpardonable sin a woman can make in Hollywood. She got old. Welcome to There's More to Our Story, Miss Mariann. You are my very first guest. Woo!
Thank you, Elisa. I'm glad to be here, and I'm honored to be your first guest.
Tell us a little bit about your story. Just give us a little background on where it all began, how you got into acting, and just you. Let's get to know a little bit about you.
Well, I fell in love with acting in the 1950s when I was growing up. I was born in 1948. And so I grew up in the 1950s. At that time, I was a little colored girl, as my dad would say. Well, as everybody would say, that's what we were called back then. And I loved the Mickey Mouse Club. And Annette Funicello was my favorite Musketeer. She had dark olive skin and she had black curly hair. And she was the closest thing to someone that I could identify with on television. Because at that time, there were not a lot of Black people, colored people, Negroes, African Americans on television. And she made me a believer. I thought that's what I want to do. I mean, I knew all the little Mickey Mouse Club songs. Um, today is Tuesday, you know what I mean? We're gonna have a special guest. And I mean, I would drive my parents crazy. As a matter of fact, my dad bought me the little musketeer hat with the little ears, the little Mickey Mouse hat, and I would run around the house pretending that I was a musketeer. And I did plays in high school. I was on Saturdays. I was part of a children's theater program at Roosevelt University in downtown Chicago. And every Saturday, I was at 9 years old because we lived in the south suburbs. I would get on the train and I would take an hour train ride downtown and I would go and I would have my ballet class. And then I would go have lunch at Wimpy's Hamburgers. And then I would come back and have my acting class. And then I would get on the train and I would come home. And, if somebody allowed a 9-year-old to do that today, they would be arrested.
Oh my
They
God.
would, they would,
Seriously, right?
yeah, they would take their children away from them. But, that was the 1950s. And at that time, it grown-ups looked out for little kids.
Yeah.
One time they switched train platforms and I got confused. And people would say, "Are you okay, little girl? Can I mean, it was a kinder, gentler time, I think,
Mhm.
growing up back then. I look at all of the technological advances that kids have today, and it's funny. I'm sounding like the grown-ups did when I was a kid back in the old days, back in my time. But it really,
It was
I
different.
have, it was different.
It's
I
a
have
different world.
a totally different world. And but yeah, that that dream never left me. And it's funny, my dad was a Pullman porter on the railroad, and he used to bring home comic books and loose change and books that people would leave on the train or would just give to him as a tip. And I can remember two books that he brought home that really influenced me. One was Think and Grow Rich, and the other one was Psycho Cybernetics.
Wow.
So at 9 years old, I was already into the metaphysical world and believing that if you focused on it and believed hard enough, you could make it so. And I guess it worked because, you know, the little town that I grew up in, Phoenix, Illinois, was literally 5 blocks by 9 blocks with a population of under 4,000 people. It was actually a village. It's not a city. And the fact that I should be able to go from there with no connections in show business whatsoever to the kind of career that I've had so far is pretty remarkable. But
Oh, for sure.
yeah, but that's
But you
why. But
also worked your ass off to get
oh,
there too.
absolutely. I mean, you have to do that. I mean, but
Right.
I think when you hold in consciousness something that you really want, and then you follow whatever instinctual instructions that you're given,
Mhm.
there's a follow through. There's an energetic, I think, build up in the I'm going to back up. As a matter of fact, in maybe 40 years ago now, I remember reading an article in Psychology Today about a study that was done at Harvard University about the difference between the mind and the brain. And this study said that the mind operates holographically in pictures and
Mhm.
images, and the brain operates like a computer to bring into physical manifestation um, what you hold in your consciousness.
Mhm.
So it's like you might hold a thought, and the brain, which on a totally subconscious level, if you're into quantum physics, we're all one, we're all part of the same thing, we're all connected. The brain will give you an instinct: go left instead of going right, or
Mhm.
do this or do that. And if you follow that, eventually, that's where the miracles happen. The little
Right.
synchronicities, the little wow, how did that happen? The little flukes. But I don't think it's a fluke. I think it's science. I think it's the rule of law, of scientific law, or spiritual law, if you're so inclined.
So lead us to sort of your first sort of really big break, which would have been The Edge of Night, right? That would have been sort of
No,
would you
I'll
I
go
mean,
back
I
even
don't
further. I'll go back
yeah,
even
go
further than
back.
that. When I was in college, I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, and I was part of the SIU touring theater.
Hmm.
And I remember our chaperone sponsor said to me, and we did two plays: In White America and The Royal Cricket of Japan. We would perform in high schools, middle schools, grammar schools, and colleges. Depending on the audience, we would perform either a children's play or the more adult play. And I remember him saying to me, "You're really good at this. I hope you follow through."
Mm.
And I hedged my bets in college because I had a double concentration, both in theater and in journalism. And when I got out of college, I didn't follow my dream. I did that. First thing I did was I followed my fallback career, which was
Oh,
the
that's
journalism.
interesting, isn't it?
Ye Yeah, I did the fallback career, and that was because I did not get any encouragement from anyone in my family, to do theater because by this I graduated college in 1970. So at this point in time, it was not thought to be practical to go into show business. I mean, neither one of
No,
my
it's still
parents.
not considered practical to go into show business.
Yeah, in the 70s and for
70s?
and the and my parents, I'm the first generation college graduate in my family, and so it was expected that I would be a teacher, a nurse,
Sure, sure.
or something like that. And my big rebellion in college was that I did not take any education courses. Like, I am not going to be a teacher. No.
Well, that was
Um,
the expectation, that was the narrative, right? That
that
was the
was it.
story you were told as a
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah. And I was an obedient child. I did not want to displease my parents. So I did my first job was in Chicago for the People's Gas Company, their publicity department. Um I ended up marrying my college sweetheart who lived in New York. So I moved to New York, and there I worked at Burson Marsteller Public Relations for a year. And then a position became available. I signed up with a headhunter, and a position was available to work at ABC Network. And I auditioned for their publicity department. And so I was inching closer to, I was getting a little bit closer. And my beat, as it were, was daytime television. So I did soap operas and game shows and all of that. And during my tenure there, I got pregnant. I went off on maternity leave. And at the time, there was a newspaper called, I think actually it still exists, Backstage. And I was reading about the auditions. And I saw an audition for a children's theater company. And I auditioned and I got it. And I think that was my first break. The
Oh,
fact that
wow.
my very first audition was for a paid gig because the theater company, Off Center Theater Company, they had a contract with the Parks Department for the city of New York. So in 1974, that summer was my first paid gig, and it was for 75 bucks a week and all you could beg in the street. we did
Wow.
we did theater, lunchtime theater, in all the parks across the city. And I remember when I auditioned because I was raised Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I still consider myself very spiritual. And I remember thinking, I rem I remember going back to harkening back to the what my advisor had told me in college, that I had talent and I should follow it and not give up on it. And I remember thinking that I had betrayed my talent. So in my
Mm.
mind, that
Wow.
was because I feel that talent is I don't know if you can hear the dogs barking, but my apologies. Um, my I believe that talent is what God gives to you, and what you
Mhm.
do with it is your gift to God. So, in my understanding of what God is, I felt that I had betrayed my gifts, I had betrayed my talent, I had betrayed God. And I made a promise, that I said, just, guide me, let me know if you're still behind me, God. If was it too big a sin? Or are you still behind me? And the fact that I got my very first paid gig on my very first audition in New York City, That to me was a sign. I thought, okay, whatever happens from here on out, I'm sticking with it. And I just never gave up. So, I mean, that to me was, to me, that was God speaking to me. Okay, I'm going to give you a second chance, kid. Here you go. And
Wow.
I never looked back.
No, you didn't, and it's been quite a journey and a successful one that followed. Kind of amazing. So, uh, tell me about the importance of getting that role, Didi Bannister. It was a pretty trailblazing opportunity.
Well, uh, in the 70s, I can remember I was part of a group of actors that included Hattie Winston and several black actors. And at the time, SAG-AFTRA was two different unions. There was AFTRA and SAG, and
Right.
AFTRA was the television union, and that covered soap operas. And then there was the Screen Actors Guild, which covered
Film.
film, and TV, a TV that was not daytime television. And I was part of a group called Orchids and Onions, and we were part of a letter writing campaign. I can remember a bunch of people at my house holding meetings where we would sit and we would write out handwritten letters because this was before the time of you know computers, um, to advertising agencies and networks. If there was something that we saw that was positive on television, that we felt was inclusive of diversity and represented Black people in a positive way, we would write an orchid letter. And if we thought it was something that was derogatory, or they were lacking in showing diversity, we would write an onion letter. And the union's response was that the reason why there were not more Black people on daytime television was because Black actors lacked the training,
Wow.
training in television, that Black actors were theater trained, but they had no experience in television. Well, that's pretty much a catch 22. How are you going to get the experience in television? If, you know. So what they did was there were 11 soap operas that were filming in New York at the time. And a director from each one of the shows, they held a lottery, and the directors from each one of the shows was assigned a scene and two actors, and the actors did the soap opera scene, and then that reel was put together, and all of the daytime casting people got a chance to look at it. Well, and I was lucky enough to be chosen to do a scene, but my scene partner wasn't there. They just kind of grabbed a hodgepodge of people together.
Sure.
So there was no talent. There was no selectivity in the process. It was just a,
Right.
a lottery. So that didn't really go very far. But a couple years later, we made enough noise so that more attention was being paid, and I was able to audition for a lot more roles on daytime television. Um, and when Didi Bannister, when the opportunity for Didi Bannister came along, I think it was maybe about my third audition for a daytime uh, series regular role, or it was recurring at the time. And I remember that there was something called Ross Reports, which was a monthly, like, little newsletter that came out that would give you all the information about where the casting people were, if there had been any changes in personnel. And I would get it every month, and I saw that The Edge of Night had a new casting director. So I put my picture and resume in an envelope with a cover sheet, and I sent it off to the casting director. And the casting director called me directly and invited me in. Now, the interesting thing is, I was doing a lot of television commercials at the time, a lot. And you could freelance. So I was probably working through about three or four different agents, none of whom submitted me for this role. but that's because I was thought of as a commercial actress.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting. It's the industry was very different in those days.
it
That was
was,
very segregated. Daytime TV, commercials, film, and primetime television. Those were different worlds.
yeah, and there was very little crossover. But Whitney Burnett, who was the casting director, saw that I had a list of credits because I would do commercials for the money, and it would afford me to do theater for no money or relatively little money. And so I had a lot of theater credits on my, off Broadway and way off Broadway. And so she called me in and I had my first audition and she said, I'm going to take you to the producer. Basically, I had 4 auditions and I had 3 auditions and then I had to do a screen test and it was whittled down to 4 of us. And I was the fourth. We went over to the Edge of Night Studios. The screen test was to read with Irving Allen Lee because this was supposed to be his love interest, who created a love triangle between him and his wife. So I was the fourth person to audition. It was the end of their regular shooting day. I walked in. We were all sitting in the green room. And first of all, John Sedgwick was the director. He brings us out. He introduces us to Irving. He gives us the blocking and he says, I'll be bringing you in one at a time. He said to do a run through and then we'll shoot it. Well, by the time they got to me, it was now 8:30 at night. And so John says, well, if it's late, why don't we just shoot your rehearsal? And if you screw up, you'll get a second chance, but let's just see if we can just get it done. Well, I knew there was going to be no second chance.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I thought, okay, this is it. Just go for it because it was 11 pages of dialogue, by the way. 11
Wow.
pages of dialogue. So I
Holy
opened the door. I
smokes.
burst through the door to see this cop, and he looks up at me. And then while we're talking, all of a sudden, I hear this oboe music. And the part of me is going, what the hell is that? Well, that show, as a cost saving measure, would lay down the music tracks during the scene. But I didn't know that. But all of a sudden, this music comes in. I tend to be a very musical person. And so
Sorry, this is hilarious to me because I had no idea.
the music, all of a sudden, I hear this do, 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 do. And I'm going, well, okay. And I kind of went, and the left part of my brain, no, the right part of my brain, yeah, that's the creative side, right? Yeah, the right part of my brain went, that's interesting. All of a sudden, my entire nerves were very calm and I leaned into the music. I just played the music and the music was kind of sexy. And so so there was, it created a tension between me and this because I was really snippy to him. But I guess there was some kind of, sex thing that was going, sexual tension underneath the scene because they sent the tape then to the network had to take a look at it and then Procter and Gamble, who was the owner of the show, had to take a look at it and everybody had to sign off on it. And a week and a half later, I got a call from Whitney Burnett saying I got the job. So I went, oh, this is pretty good. And the assistant director, uh, I knew that I was not John's favorite. There was a woman who was on Broadway at the time, and I knew that he was his favorite. So he wasn't really happy to see me when I showed up. Like, I got to work with this kid. But the assistant director came up to me and she said, I watched your screen test, and she said there was just something between you and Irving. It was just magic. I swear it was the music. And Lois Kibbe, I remember my first shooting scene was my audition scene, and I remember Lois Kibbe, wonderful, wonderful actress who had been on the show for years, came up to me and she said, "Listen, kid, just keep telling yourself I'm damned good and they're lucky to have me. I went, okay, I can do this.
Wow.
So there was
Wow.
a little, and it's funny. It's because I make it a point now because whenever you're a regular on a show and guest casts come on, I think it's the hardest to be the new kid on the block when everybody
Oh,
else knows
yeah. Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
So I've taken my cue from Lois Kibbe, and I make sure that when somebody new comes onto my show, I'm kind of like the cruise director on the Love Boat. So I welcome them and, make them feel comfortable so they can do their best work because that's what was done to me. So I pay it forward. And so I was on the show. It was supposed to be a 3-month story arc. 3 months later, Nick Nicholson, who was the executive producer, says, how do you like it here? I said, I like it. And he said, good, have your agent call me. And so my agent called and about putting me under contract. Something happened, or like a couple weeks had passed and nothing had happened. And I booked a douche commercial. And I I remember, and it was a Procter and Gamble product. And I had to ask permission because I think I was shooting that day, and I wanted to see if they could alter the shooting schedule so I could do my commercial. And we did that all the time. And Nick called me into his office and he said, "A douche commercial, Marianne? Really?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We can't have our little Didi doing a douche commercial." And I said, "Well, Nick, that's how I make my living. I'm not under contract right now, so I really can't turn it down." Literally the next day, that I got my contract. They sent the
Wow.
contract over to my agent. So that was a little leverage. And no, I did not do the douche commercial. I turned it down. But I think it was a good trade-off because I got a 3-year contract with Edge of Night. Or 2 years, I guess it was, because the show was only on for another 3 years, 3.5 years. So I did, and I had started the show in July, I think was
Can
my
I
first
just say,
week. Yes.
dating this, I don't know, do they even do douche commercials anymore? Because that
Yet
was a
I don't.
thing, but I don't see much of
Yeah.
that now.
No.
It was
It
pretty
was
common
Summer's
back in the
Eve.
day.
Do you remember Summer's Eve?
Oh, yeah, but,
Yes.
in the field, they're going into the field. It was always women in a field for freshness, but okay, I digress, but that just made me laugh because we don't tend to see that much anymore, and it was pretty common in back years ago.
It was. As a matter of fact, I did so many of, like, I think I did a tampon commercial to the point that J. Michael Bloom gave me the nickname of Miss Feminine Hygiene.
Oh,
Here she
jeez.
goes, Miss Feminine
Oh
Hygiene.
my god.
Um, yeah.
That's just
Um,
funny, but I digress. Go back to Dee
yeah,
Dee.
but we have erectile dysfunction commercials. How about that? You know?
Oh, please. Exactly. We've
Okay, but
switched.
anyway. But,
Well,
so where
I
did you
do
wanna
wanna
go?
ask you a little bit one little thing because it's something you have talked to me and it sort of comes it's still relevant now and what you are doing now. Um, you talked to me about when you were playing the role of Dee Dee, you were pretty you took responsibility. You understood the responsibility that you had in that role, and you took great care in making sure the writers never took Dee Dee in a way that you were not going to feel that was authentic or representing her appropriately. And you've mentioned that a bit to me. There were a couple of times, and it it was important to you. It had
Oh, yeah.
because this kinda goes in thematically about the power of media and what telegraphs, how it impacts culture, how it impacts society, and you were very aware of that when you were playing Dee Dee. Do you wanna talk a little bit about that?
Well, to understand why it was so important to me, I have to share a story that happened that involves my son, who was 4 at the time. I was making dinner. He was sitting at the table, um, and some I I think it was Starsky and Hutch. There was a Starsky and Hutch rerun, something, and pardon me for a bad mother letting my 4-year-old child watch Starsky and Hutch, but what the hell? I was cooking dinner, TV was on, and that just happened to be it. And all of a sudden, I hear him say, "Uh oh, here comes the bad guy." I come on, I look at him, and I look at what's on TV, and I said, "Christopher, how do you know he's the bad guy?" And it was the black guy who was on camera. And
Wow.
he said, "Because he's brown."
Oh,
Okay. That was a
he
stab in the
was
heart.
4.
He was 4. I said, "Chris, what color are you?" He said, "Brown." I said, "What? Are you a bad guy?" "No." I said, "What color is your dad?" He said, "Brown." He said, I said, "Are you a bad guy?" I said, "Is he a bad guy?" He said, "No." I said, "What color am I?" And he hesitated for a minute because I'm fair skin. He doesn't know his color. Well, yeah, I guess you're brown. And he beige, whatever, mom. And he said, and he started laughing. He goes, "He's brown." And I said, "Yes." And am I a bad guy? He goes, "No." And I said, "Well, then how do you know this man is a bad guy just because he's brown?" And he started chortling and laughing at me like I had to be the world's biggest dodo head. And he said, "Mommy, because it's television." Already at the age of 4, he had been indoctrinated into the fact that when the brown person came on, it was more than likely he was the bad guy.
Hmm.
And I remember I wrote an article. It was in the Daily News. I mean, I was just I was then, and I am to this day very much an activist. If I see something that's wrong, I'm going to speak up about it and talk to the powers that be. I will speak truth to power, respectfully, so they will hear me. But I do speak truth to power, um, and so in my in my heart, in my consciousness, the way I was raised, when you are one of the first, when you are one of the few, you do have a certain responsibility
Mhm.
because your performance will um, have an effect on whether or not doors will open behind you and you will
Yes.
keep those doors open, or if those doors will close, if they will slam shut, because he said, "We're not going to let anything like this back in again because you see how this worked out." So yes, I always had felt a sense of responsibility about that. And I, to the point that I would have, conversations with no, I didn't necessarily have to have a bunch of conversations. There was one conversation that I had, and that was when we got a new head writer, um, who was coming in and making a lot of changes to the show. Because when a new writer comes onto a show, a writer may leave a show, but they collect residuals on the characters they create. So when new writers come onto a show, the first thing they want to do is get rid of a bunch of old characters and create new characters that, should they leave, they can still collect royalties. So he was explaining to everybody what was going to happen to the storyline, and didn't hadn't had nothing about me. I thought, oh, well, that's not good. And my contract was getting ready to come up. I think I had 3 more months on my contract. And I thought, oh, this isn't good. And then the storyline that happened was that uh, this villain, Louis Van Dyne, was trying to take over the town of Monticello with by putting subliminal messaging in the cable TV system.
Gotta love soap operas.
Yep. And then there was the ISIS building, and there was this sculpture, wall art of ISIS that was in every office building. And of course, Cliff and Didi moved their office, their law firm into the ISIS building, and so they would pulsate subliminal messaging throughout the building. Didi uh, was affected by this, and eventually, I'm putting this in air quotes now, drove her crazy to the point that my character was carted off in a what do you call those things? The
Straight
straight
jacket?
jacket. Yeah, the straight jacket to the mental institution. Well, I saw that and I thought, okay, so that's the end of Dee Dee. She's not coming back. When the hospital personnel came to take Dee Dee away, the script said that she picked up a letter opener on her desk and she stabbed her law partner with it. I thought, no, I'm not going to do that.
Mm-mm.
I went to the producer and the head writer, and I remember being in the office and I said, I cannot do this because I cannot have Dee Dee stab her law partner with a knife. And so it's not a knife, it's a letter opener. I said, the audience is not going to see the difference between, the letter. And I said, because what are you saying about this character? This character means too much to too many people. And Dee Dee's not that crazy that I said, I'll push him. I'll push a chair at him. I'll push a desk at him. I'll slug him if I have to. But I'm not going to pick up a knife and stab my law partner. I'm just not, because of the association with Black people. No, I'm not going to do it. So he said, well, she's losing her mind. She's going crazy. And I said, nope, she's not that damn crazy. I said, what are you saying about the character? That you can take the girl out of the ghetto, but you can't take the ghetto out of the girl? I'm not doing it. And so they were insistent, to the point that I said this, and this is a quote. I don't care what the audience is seeing is just another nigga with a blade, and I'm not doing it. Well, guess what? That stopped the conversation, and I did not have to do it.
Wow.
Um,
But you
uh,
were a young actress. That was pretty brave and
but
bold.
what were they going to do? Fire me? They were
Right.
going to fire
They
me
were
anyway.
writing you out. But it's still, not everybody would have had the internal strength to recognize the importance of what you were representing and say, I have a boundary here and I'm not crossing it.
Well, that's because they did not have my daddy as a father.
Okay.
My father instilled in me. I mean, when I was in college, drove my mother crazy. When I was in college, my father was very political. Um, he was no, I was he was 42 when I was born, which at that time was, late to be having kids. And so he was always like the oldest dad. Uh, when he was in his 70s, he started a shuttle program for the senior citizens. He's 75 now, keep in mind, but he's shuttling the old people, because that's not him, to their doctor's appointments and things like that. He was honored by the governor of Springfield for all of his work in the community. And when I was in college, he took out a second mortgage on our house to run for the village president of the little village, Phoenix, Illinois, because he didn't think that the government was being run properly. Now, P.S. He did not win, but the young man, he's not young, he's 50, but the man who is now the mayor of the village of Phoenix, Illinois, I met him at a Christmas party, and he came up to my sister and me and he said how much my father had influenced him.
Wow. Wow.
So, yeah. So my dad was kind of, he had a reputation for being, it's like, mm, mm, my dad stood up for what was right. And so that's what he instilled in me as a child and as an adult. So that's how I function in life. You do what you need to do. And I will back up. when I think I'd been on this show on Edge of Night for about 6 months. I remember I used to go to church on Sundays. It was either Science of the Mind or Unity, which was either at Alice Tully or Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center. And after church, I would go across the street to a little coffee shop and have breakfast. And one Sunday I was over there. I walked in. I remember walking in, and the in the back I saw this older woman. I remember she was a little tiny lady, black woman, and I walked in and she kind of looked up and she saw me and she kind of nodded and smiled, and I, kind of nodded back to her. I sit down, I'm having breakfast. I'm facing towards the door, so I'm not seeing her walk as she's exiting. But so she's walking out the door. She turns around, she leans over to me, she cups my chin in her hand, and she says, "Oh, baby, it's so good to see you on that show." And she had tears in her eyes.
Oh, I'm getting a little teary-eyed hearing this. Hold
So,
on. Whew.
so that, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps right
I
now.
am completely goosebumps right now and a little verklempt.
So that told me everything I needed to know about what that character meant. And I was getting like recognition from different black groups in New York City, churches and stuff like that. They would send me plaques or little things like that because I was as a positive image, a positive role model. Um, because it's not just that I was a black daytime soap opera heroine, but that I was a black professional woman. I was a lawyer.
Right.
I had a career. I was a professional, and you didn't see a lot of that. I mean, there was Angie and Jesse were on, and they were very popular at the same time. Um, Darnell Williams and Debbie Morgan at the time were on the same time that Irving and I were on Edge of Night, but they were high school students, and they had high school problems. But I was a lawyer, and Irving was a excuse me, he wasn't just a cop, he was a detective. So it was pretty meaningful. And in fact, I found out, you know, recently on Facebook, someone wrote that seeing Calvin and Didi was gave her the first positive impression of what black love was. And I went, wow, you know, you don't know
Wow.
how you're affecting people until they come up, years later and tell you. And I think of all the people who I will never meet, I'll never get to know, but I consider that part of my responsibility. Absolutely, yes. When you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can make an impact, um, you have to be responsible because it's not just about you.
Wow. Um, I want to ask you, and we may, um, we're coming up on an hour right now, and there's so much more to want to talk about. Um,
Well, bring me back.
well, that's what I was going to ask you. I kind of feel this is better as a two-part episode because, first of all, understanding your background is so incredibly important, and it really actually ties into the theme, even though my particular there's more to our story is about the ageism and the aging out of women, but it is a dual message. There's more to our story is not just about we just don't fall off the face of the earth when we hit 40 or 50, which Hollywood at times would make us believe. It's also there's more to our story that we need we need expanded narratives. There's so much more to women's stories, and this part of your journey is is a perfect example of that because until those narratives show up, until they expand those narratives, i- the message is they're not out there.
Right.
They don't exist. and they do. We just don't realize it. 'Cause we're not hearing it, we're not seeing it. So, I would love to make this a two-part episode if you are open to doing that, because I would like to continue because your journey very specifically talks about there's more to our story in so many ways.
I'm the intersectionality of age, race, and gender.
Oh, to say the least. Okay, we're going to leave it right there for now and leave you wanting more. So, to hear the second half of our conversation, which continued on, you'll have to tune in next week. We'll be back next Friday with the second half of my conversation with the incredibly talented Mariann Aalda.